tonight let's dig into the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have your Bibles, Exodus 20 is where this kind of begins.
Yes, and we're not going to just pull a verse or look at a subset of verses, but we're going to actually give some background information, some context, because we think in our ministry that it's very, very important to never just pick out a verse or a few verses without having understanding of what the heck's going on in the storyline of the Bible.
Right.
So, Nick, tell us a little bit about what's happening in Exodus 20. Where are we in the storyline of our Bibles?
So leading up into the story of the wilderness, which leads up into the story of Exodus 20, Israel, the Israelites have been in Egypt for 400 years as essentially slaves, immersed in a culture that's full of different gods.
Yeah, lots of gods.
Yeah, right. So their identity is essentially they have no clue who they are, where they came from, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So God has pulled them out of Egypt, right, with
Through
Moses.
Yeah, and this is through the promise that he gave to Abraham, so he's fulfilling that promise through the covenant with Abraham.
Right. And so we have now landed at Mount Sinai in Exodus 20, which is why this is called the Sinai Covenant.
Okay.
So this is the covenant that God makes with the nation of Israel.
Okay.
Okay, so far so good.
So far so good.
So interesting fact, in the Hebrew Bible, the Ten Commandments are actually not called the Ten Commandments.
Okay, what
They're
are they
actually
called?
called the 10 words.
Okay.
So in the Hebrew Bible, commandments never shows up.
Okay. But for the sake of our translation and our understanding, we're going to call them the commandments.
Right, because the term for words in the Hebrew takes on a whole bigger meaning than the term for words in our language. And so that's why it's translated as commandments, because it kind of fulfills that role for that term.
Okay.
If you've ever heard of the term the Decalogue, it's the Greek version, or the Greek way of saying the Ten Commandments. Deca meaning 10, logos being
word.
So so if you've ever heard that, that's why that's the way it is.
Okay, so there's kind of some background information.
Right.
This is where we're at in the storyline.
Right.
The Israelites have now been removed from Egypt. They're in the middle of the wilderness, on the way to the land that God has promised them, and
we're at a stop.
We're at a stop.
Right.
And these people are probably really confused. Who are we? Where do we come from? Who is this God?
Right, and the guy that's been leading them, right, Moses. And if you've read this and you're tracking his travel log as his GPS, probably not. What you will find is that Moses is not on the top of the mountain with God.
Okay.
Moses is now at the bottom of the mountain with the people.
When I primarily think of Moses, I think of him on top of the mountain multiple times, talking to the Lord to relay a message.
Right.
And at one point in time, he does have the Ten Commandments on a stone.
Down the road.
Down the road, okay.
Right. So at this moment
is before.
in time, he is with the people, and this is the only set of commandments that God will speak to the people in the hearing of the people, including everybody of the people.
So God is verbally speaking to the entire nation of Israel, including Moses.
Right. And that shows the importance that these words, these 10 commandments, are the official terms of the Sinai covenant that God is making with Israel. That's why he's speaking this on his own.
Okay, so if God is speaking to the entire group, probably pretty important.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
When you think of the 10 commandments, what do you think of in terms of...
Just what comes to my mind?
Yeah.
Well, just with my upbringing in church, what immediately comes to my mind, even with knowing what the Ten Commandments really are, the first thing that comes to my mind, which is probably the paradigm that I grew up with, is that these are rules to follow. And if you break these rules, there are serious consequences. That's what comes to my mind.
So it's about attaining moral perfection.
Yeah, this is how to be a good person. And if you break these rules, then you no longer are a good person, and there are consequences that follow.
Good, that's awesome. And I have
which I know is not
good news.
Correct.
It is not.
Yeah.
You're right. It is not correct.
But it's interesting growing up with that paradigm that it, how I still have to fight that notion in my mind, now knowing what the commandments or the words truly mean.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. What you're going to find that it's not about moral perfection, right? It's about maintaining or preserving a proper worship to God.
So it's not about being a good person. It is about our heart posture towards God.
And there's two things.
Okay.
So worship to God.
So our heart.
Worship of God.
Okay.
And it's the shared responsibility or seriousness of Israel as the image bearers of God.
Okay.
10 Commandments, not moral perfection.
Okay.
It's about proper worship to God, and we will find that it's about proper worship to only God, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
And it's about the responsibility of Israel as being God's image bearers to the nation.
Okay.
So far, so good?
So far, so good. Let's dig in a little bit more.
So what God's doing
Mm-hmm.
is He's giving an identity to an identity-less people. Right? That's pretty good.
That's good. I think you just made up a new word.
They've been in Israel. They've been in Israel.
They've been in Egypt.
They've been in Egypt, not Israel. They've been in Egypt for a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Their identity has been stripped away.
They're very far removed from who they are.
Right. These 10 words, these 10 commandments, is about God giving an identity to His chosen people, Israel.
Which they very much so need at this point in their lives.
Right. These 10 words isn't about moral perfection. It's about creating a lifestyle.
So it's not about them being good people. It's about them coming into their identity and understanding better their God
Yeah.
and His character and the parameters He's setting up for them to be His people.
Exactly. And then reflecting that to the nations around them that don't live by that same...
Those same standards.
Yeah, right. Very good. That's very good. Yeah, that's exactly what that is.
Okay.
So you think about Israel. It's a covenant community now. God is making this into a community of Israelite people.
It's the same way we think of community of believers today.
Right.
It is what unites us if we are believers.
Right.
That is what brings us together.
Mhm.
We are a community
Mm-hmm.
of believers living for the Lord.
Right.
And this is a community of God's people.
Yeah, right. And when you in this community, in this covenant community, every part of your life, every part of their life is about loyalty and worship to God.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you think about that, the way that they would treat others, right, which you will see later on in these 10 Commandments, is a direct reflection of their heart towards God. Right. So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay, so what you get out of that is that it's this proper nature toward God, right? Individuals' responsibility, their nature toward God, then reflects the entire community, right? If it's a whole, but it's a singular doing the whole. Does that make sense? It's everybody doing the thing the right way.
Well, I don't know if I would use the terminology the right way, but God's way.
Yeah, right. God's way. Yeah,
Because we don't want to get back into the moral handbook of things.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is that the actions of a person within this community individually is both the reflection of how they love, view, and worship God, as well as if they do something to others that are not the right thing.
Right.
It also has major implications to the entire community,
Yeah.
as well as it's also reflecting your heart towards how you view and worship God.
Yeah, that's very good. Man, you should have said that. That was great. So yeah,
That's why we're a team.
That's good. So we know that there are 10 commandments. Traditionally, breaking up the 10 commandments has been a difficult process for interpreters of the Bible.
Yeah, not knowing really where to start.
Right. We kind of get stuck on where to start in the first 5 and the last 2. It's a little sticky, but we do know that there are 10.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 34:28. Nope. Exodus 34:28 and Deuteronomy 4:13 tell us that there are actually 10.
Okay.
So we do know that.
Okay.
Good?
Good.
Okay.
10 words. 10 commandments.
10 words, 10 commandments.
Okay.
So let's look at commandment number 1. Commandment number 1 has had multiple ways of interpreting it throughout the ages. We read an amazing book by Carmen Joy Imes, who has devoted so far her almost entire life's work into this in Exodus. And she's come up with a way that I've adopted, and I think that you've adopted on how to interpret the first commandment.
Yeah, so this is where we are today
Right.
in what we're adopting.
Right.
Because it makes sense within the storyline, within the narrative.
Right, and it makes sense in the structure of the covenant, which you'll see, and why it kind of just
Okay,
makes
so let's
sense.
dig into
Okay,
it.
so the way that it looks is that you would actually start the commandment with verse 2.
I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
Right. And then it continues on all the way through verse 6.
So that's command 1.
That would be command 1. Most of the time it's broken up into 2 different commandments.
Okay.
She, and I think it's brilliant, has sandwiched these all into one commandment.
Okay, so let's read them.
So,
You shall have no other gods before me.
Mm-hmm.
You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth.
Mm-hmm.
You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me.
Yeah.
In verse 6 or no?
So we can just stop right there. It would end in verse 6, but yeah.
That was verse 5.
Yeah, it ends in verse 6.
Oh, so then verse 6 is, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments.
Yeah, so that is all sandwiched in the way that we look at it right now as one commandment.
As commandment number 1.
Commandment number 1.
Okay.
And the reason is, if you start in verse 2 with, I am the Lord your God, it essentially is saying, I am the God who set you free,
Okay.
right? I am your God. Therefore, you worship me alone. Have no other gods. Don't make any images. Don't worship those things. You've created this chiasm of God, what not to do, why to worship me alone, God again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you've created this space.
Bread, and everything in between.
And here's the reason why, and it makes really good sense.
Or cucumbers if you're vegan.
Yeah. So, historically, this is why it makes really good sense. Historically, in the ancient world, images and worship went hand in hand. If you had an image, you worshipped that image. You didn't worship something that you didn't have. So the means of worship were images. So that's why all of these things are sandwiched into this one commandment.
Okay.
So what that does is, when you bring them all together, right, it shows that the prohibition or the prevention of images, it highlights the seriousness of the command to worship God alone. Commandment number 1 is about worshiping God alone. In the ancient world, they had a framework that there were other gods.
Mm-hmm.
What God's doing in this is not telling them that He's the only God. This isn't a monotheistic document.
Yeah.
This is a document, it's about worshiping God alone. Don't worship other gods. Don't make those idols. Worship me alone.
So we see God, even in the Old Testament, literally flipping the worldview upside down, because the world around the Israelites and the world that they just came from was a world where you worshipped multiple gods. What He's now saying is you worship one God.
Which is, what you said, it's unheard
No
of.
others.
It's exclusive worship for Israel for one God.
It's literally flipping the worldview upside down.
Right.
Upside down kingdom.
Yeah, that's
Pretty
exactly right.
much.
Which we
In the
hear
Old
about,
Testament.
Yeah, right. Which we hear about with Jesus. And that's beautiful. It's flipping everybody's worldview upside down, especially Israel's.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it goes against the grain, it's against the norm of what all of the other cultures are doing around the Israelites.
Yeah. When Israel makes idols, and we'll see this, right? And they worship these idols. They're giving reverence to these things that don't belong to these gods and these images. Reverence and holy and all of that only belongs to God.
Yeah, Yahweh Elohim.
Right. And when they're doing this, they're taking that away from God. But what they're also doing is that they are robbing their own sense of responsibility and dignity as being God's image bearers, right? God, this is so cool. God created an image already of Himself in humanity.
Human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not in wooden statues, not in anything else. He's already done that in humans, and more specifically in this story as Israel, right?
Yeah.
And so when they're making these other idols and worshiping, they're wiping out their own importance in this, right? And I think what God's doing is He's preserving the sanctity of His own worship.
Yeah.
And the responsibility of humans to bear His image. It's all about worship and image, not moral perfection.
And it all points back to God.
Right. It's yes. If you're going to take anything away from this, The first command is about worship God alone. Exclusively
Worship God and God alone.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. That's good. No, that's great. I love that. I love breaking this apart. So next week, we actually had one of our viewers ask us to go over the third and fourth generation aspect of the commandments. So we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper. And then we're really going to get into the meat of verse 7.
Yeah.
Where you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and talk about what that really means in the Hebrew. Because it is not saying God's name as a curse word.
Yeah, right. It's
Which we still don't want to do that.
Right.
It still takes away from the reverence of God. Right. But there's a lot more to that verse.
Yeah, and when you dig into this, it's fascinating, and you'll see how that ties into what we just
talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
And how these two things set the tone and the structure for all the other commandments that come after it. But those are the meat and potatoes, so to speak.
I like it.
Right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, well, stay tuned for next week's video as we dig deeper into these 10 commandments. If you guys have any questions, anything you guys want us to go over, please feel free to message us, email us, put in the comments.
We love it.
We are more than happy to do so. And yeah, this is really good stuff. It has a lot of life-changing trajectory information to really help us better understand the God of our Bible.
Yeah.
And the God of the universe who created us and who loves us.
Yeah.